I wanted very badly to get Josh here, and I let him run overtime because I think this is the work of genius, personally. Not telling us what we can do with our money, but just saying to the politicians, if you regulate X, you can't take money from X. And that's great stuff, and that cuts it off right at the corruption point. And so this is a very important initiative. Thank you, Josh. We're going to turn it over to the audience now. The panel can chime in if they want to, but we need let's get the audience going here. Yes, sir. Stephen.
Gus, thank you, and thank the whole panel for terrific reports this morning. My question to the whole panel is, how do you take this vision that has just been presented to us and relate it to South Carolina and the situation here?
Well, I'll take a first stab. I think the first way you do it is you start, the baby step is you start by doing the 435 campaign in South Carolina. How many U.S. reps are in the state? Do you know? 7? And then you can then see how this kind of campaign can actually be replicated to the state level, where state-based anti-corruption acts, I didn't include it in the deck because, believe it or not, I was trying not to go over. Then you create state-based anti-corruption acts, which are going to be, by their nature, different from each other, radically different from state to state, but can all include something on campaign finance, something on lobbying laws, something on disclosure, and then you have to include things like voting issues because they are within the jurisdiction of the state. But each will be quite different based on constitutionality. Our vision is create a movement of state-based anti-corruption acts, all sharing the same brand, which is a very powerful brand.
Lynn.
What most of the people who control our laws, the legislators, respond to is the danger of being kicked out of office. And we know that gerrymandering has made that much less likely in South Carolina and elsewhere. We need to pay a lot more attention to that issue, and we need to lean on the legislators. I think all of us would agree one of the hardest things to do is get to the public to make them understand that these underlying issues have to be addressed. If you're going to protect the environment, you must first address these underlying issues.
Mm-hmm. South Carolina, it's not the fear of losing, it's the fear of having to run.
Actually, more than half have no opposition. It is so hopeless that they have no opposition in the general election. However, primaries are very interesting in the state.
I'm going to take advantage of Stephen's question just to make a plug. So, as Gus mentioned, there are several states, Maryland, Vermont, and soon Oregon, that have adopted a genuine progress indicator for their state, and we're working with them on the operational aspects of that. Utah as well is doing some things with its Quality Growth Commission. And in June, we're actually bringing together delegations from 14 new states in Baltimore to engage with, if you will, the early adopter states and figure out how they can get GPI initiatives off the ground in their states. So I just put that out there for the CCL to consider. Who from your group or who else within the state kind of policy world you might recommend to send to Baltimore so you can start working on this issue for South Carolina. And the one thing I would add is simply that this was an interesting experience we had in Utah, which has a strong Mormon church. I know you have strong religious communities in South Carolina as well. A lot of the positives that show up in the GPI come through things like family and community. And so there's a real engagement point there, even in conservative states, to start thinking more about well-being instead of growth.
Mr. Mayor.
I just wanted to validate one of the points that Josh made, and that is if you get more people involved in the system, it makes a huge difference. 30 years ago, Seattle had a public matching fund system where the city would match up to $50 on a contribution, and the candidate in return for taking that would have to agree to a limit on how much they would spend in their campaign. Almost every candidate signed up for it. It reduced the amount of money going into those campaigns. It increased by a factor of 10 the number of people who contributed, and it was such a threat to the status quo that the Republican Party ran an initiative statewide that had a little proviso in it that no city, no local government could have a matching fund campaign. So it was done away with through the back door, but it worked. And if you get people feeling like they own the system, then they're going to hold their elected officials accountable, and they're going to feel a real sense of ownership of our civil society.
Okay, more questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Lou Daly, could you unpack a little bit more about what measures of biocapacity are? Some of us.
Oh, in the mic.
Okay. For Lou Daly, could you tell us a little bit more about what are the measures of biocapacity?
Well, speaking to the way the GPI framework looks at the dimension of environmental variables, it's things like the cost of water pollution, the cost of air pollution. These are the things that are deducted. The cost of noise pollution, this was a recent controversy in the small world of GPI researchers. Noise pollution, really? Costs of wetland change, net farmland change, loss of forest acre coverage, ozone depletion. So the whole range of biophysical trends, and putting a price on the costs that occur when those are depleted. That's basically how it works.
Okay. Please, so you've got the mic right here, and then we'll get the gentleman behind you.
Hi, I'm a local. I have one comment and one question. The comment is about apathy. The town that I live in has about 4 council seats coming up for re-election and a new mayor. Apathy is everywhere. I can't find anybody who wants to run against the mayor, and I can't find anybody who wants to run for council. So the people who are there will become reelected. That's one comment. So I'm having a terrible time with apathy. The second thing is, I also have problems with people talking about property rights. And if we want to save a lot of the beautiful land that's left in my town, what I run up against is, Pat, we can't fight property rights. Somebody owns something, other than zoning, they can do whatever they want to with it. So if y'all have any positive comments on how to deal with those things, I'd appreciate it.
Lynn, would you want to comment on the apathy issue in the state?
Well, we've been trying to fight the apathy issue on ethics and on voting and election issues and other things in the League of Women Voters. And it is tough, however, we have found that if you can start getting sort of a critical mass of op-eds and letters to the editor and so forth, it tends to actually begin to chip away at them. And we are pretty sure we would not have gotten as far as we have with the current ethics reforms if we hadn't done that. Nevertheless, especially, I don't know which town you're from and how big it is, but I know in South Carolina there's often if it's a fairly small town, a disinclination to compete with the neighbors about something that'll create hard feelings. But, there is an inadequate appreciation of how representative democracy is supposed to work in this state, and we need to work on educating people and educating kids in the schools so they understand it's not normal to have things be the way they are here.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your comments. One thing that Ann Timberlake just said struck a bell with me, and this is kind of off the cuff, but it seems to me the one source of money that has not been addressed here, the one source of influence, and the reason that there is nobody running against incumbents goes back to a joke that when I was a cadet at the Citadel back in the dark ages, that what made Charleston great was its 3 great rivers, the Ashley, the Cooper, and the El Mendel. And I live in Columbia now, and I've just experienced a bunch of grants that have come to Columbia, which has cost Columbia money, but has bought a lot of votes. And none of the things that you have presented, or I've missed it, has addressed that issue.
For those of you who may not know, L. Mendel Rubbers was the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee for a long time, and he ensured that there was a lot of military activity going on in and around Charleston County, which required a lot of dredging of the rivers to get those atomic submarines under the bridges and other things. Anyhow, that was contracting, government expenditures. Anybody want to comment on that, Josh?
I think I'll go local. Well, can you, is the mic still near? Can you clarify, though, in terms of what specifically, can you just clarify your question a little bit?
Well, South Carolina, I believe any
So just bringing home the pork problem. Yeah, I think this is your.
things that that congressmen can do for a specific place.
Yeah, all right.
Send money there, or in the other case, and that is what ensures that our people stay in office here.
Okay, thanks. So here's the issue is, I think, a bifurcated answer. I'm going to do the first half. And transparency at the federal level is the most important thing, right? And as you know, pork has been inserted into legislation anonymously for many years, and there's been some progress made on pork in recent years. But as I indicated with the Amgen bill, it still happens all the time. But at least making it very clear who is inserting which pieces into federal legislation when is a first step, and that's the most you can get out of federal legislation, because politicians will always have the legal right to attempt to put pieces of legislation into larger bills or introduce their own bills whenever they like.
I can understand that, sir, but my congressman even came, when he was pointed this out, he said it's the duty of the elected official to deliver to his constituents. And so I think it is an infusion of ethics, maybe the only thing that is the salvation here.
Well, it's a sense of who are they responsible to. And in South Carolina, one of the worst problems is the people in charge are only responsible to districts. You know, the Speaker of the House is arguably the most powerful person in the state government, and he is responsible only to one district. And he favors things like extending 526 over improving I-26, which is incredibly important to our state's economy. 526 would make it faster to get to the Fat Hen restaurant, which I appreciate, but it's not really a crucial economic issue. It is, however, very important for developers, who are a big part of the system in the state, and in fact are probably the most important lobby. So who are they accountable to? We need more accountability in the right place. We need people who are accountable to the whole state, and therefore we need more executive control of some of these issues. We don't need a state transportation infrastructure board. I would argue there's a lot less true pork in the system than there used to be, in the sense that there isn't enough money, certainly in South Carolina, left to do the basic things we need to do. So the problem is, where does it go? Does it go someplace we need it statewide, or does it go to benefit a few? Right now it's going to benefit a few.
Let's take just a couple of more questions. I think there's one over here.
I have a couple questions about GDP and GPI, and those are where are some of the key areas where GDP is used as a metric, perhaps to our detriment, or maybe where GPI could be used in its place as a benefit? And secondly, does GPI or another index account for self-reliance, like we heard in some comments yesterday about folks being land rich and cash poor, where quality of life is not necessarily reflected on dollars spent and that sort of thing? So the two questions about, yeah.
Well, I always say that GDP is not just a number, it's a system. It's growth. So, I mean, there are technical ways like monetary policy and deciding whether or not we're in a recession, and fiscal policy when we're doing counter-cyclical to get out of a recession, where GDP is the be-all and end-all. Of course, unemployment is another very important measure for politics and for policy development. But the real problem is the model of growth that is anchored in GDP. And the GDP excludes so much that shows a very different picture of growth. And it's sort of how that got embedded. When the founder, the architect of GDP, Simon Kuznets, presented it to Congress in 1934 for the first time, it's very interesting to read his comments. He's like, okay, here's a measure of our basic economic activity, but please do not confuse this number with the progress of our country, the welfare of our people. It doesn't get us anywhere close to generating those things, just simply look at economic activity. So it's embedded in our policy structure and in our politics in those ways. I think that there's a lot of room for change and evolution in how GPI measures sort of the household sector. And I think the points you raise about other kinds of sort of non-market aspects of household security and well-being are really important to incorporate. So that's something that we'll work on going forward for sure.
I think this lady here has the last question.
Lynn, my question is for you. In reviewing the Judicial Code of Ethics recently, or Code of Conduct, I'm curious if how can our legislators ask judicial candidates and Public Service Commission candidates to follow that? And is there a source within it that might be helpful to legislators to follow something that they ask others to follow?
Well, that's never been a great concern that I've noticed down at the State House. However, the Judicial Code of Conduct has been brought up a number of times, and sometimes by, in fact, committee members who have said, as an attorney, I must abide by the Judicial Code of Conduct. A lot of this is not new to me that's in this bill. What's the big hang-up? And very often, the hang-up lies, of course, in the business affairs of a certain percentage of those legislators. So, yes, they're aware that the judiciary has a totally well-developed code that's already out there. They're not universally excited about doing it themselves.
Well, in conclusion, just a couple of notes. I hope that that there will be a follow-up with Lou Daley on the possibility of beginning to move a genuine progress indicator forward in South Carolina. I hope there'll be a follow-up with Lynn on how to get the most out of the legislature in this current session or next session on the ethics reform legislation. And I hope that the League of Conservation Voters and the League of Women Voters and Common Cause in the state here and the Coastal Conservation League and others will begin to have a discussion with Josh about how to develop the possibilities of his kind of approach here in the state. Those would all be great things to see happen. We'll have a big hand for the panel, please.